Resource or course? What does this mean? Well, I'm not going to tell you because our speaker will tell you. But in the past, a course definitely is something where you've got information delivered over a time period. Kenny, how does a resource differ?
I think a resource...
Sorry, I forgot to say, Kenny is taking this so seriously, he's got his iPhone out and he's got the stopwatch on to make sure he sticks to his 60 seconds. That's commitment to quality. Kenny, restart your stopwatch and off you go.
Yeah, just following my other two speakers. Okay. I think for me the resource piece comes about flexibility for the organisation, flexibility for the learner as well, and creating just-in-time opportunities. How many people here have been on a one-day or a two-day Microsoft Excel course and gone back to the workplace and 3 months later thought, okay, how do I do macros, or how do I do, and actually you've forgotten about it. How much more useful would it be if you could download a crib sheet that says in 10 easy steps, here's how you do what you were looking for, you know, when you went that course 3 months ago. I think as well, that's from a learner perspective, it's really valuable. I think organisations as well, it's taking people out of the business. So Sky News, for example, it costs an awful lot of money to backfill a live 24/7 operation. When we take someone out for training, giving them access to resources gives organisations much more flexibility.
Okay. Was that 60 seconds? Yeah, good. Okay, so there's a couple of reasons why there's a benefit to the organisation of using resources and courses, but what we're going to look at now is a combination of things. In a second we'll ask the question about both the benefits but also what the barriers are to introducing resources. First though, let's turn to Jenny. Jenny, do we have any statistics that back up what Kenny's saying from mature users?
Well, I think an interesting one that I'll just share with you is when we asked learning and development staff whether they consider the course as just one of many options for building skills and performance. And a horrible, amazing 55% thought that that was indeed the case, that learning and development staff think the course is just one of many options. Now 55% means that there are 45% who are looking at learning technologies in terms of the course.
Right.
And I'm afraid that changes and gets even worse when we go into certain sectors of industry. I hope I'm not going to offend anybody here who might be from the finance sector, for instance, where we're looking at 58% thinking that the course is the only option here.
Wow.
27% in not-for-profits, though. There seems to be a bit of a difference emerging here, that those who are less entrenched, perhaps, in having to provide compliance-related and regulated courses have that extra freedom to be able to explore new technologies.
Absolutely. Okay, that's interesting. So there's the shift that we've been seeing for some time towards resources is not quite as widespread, according to Jenny, as I would have hoped or thought. Charles, Rose, any reaction to those stats and to Kenny?
Yeah, I mean, courses are essentially a hangover from the way we learn at school and the way people are taught in a classroom. I think it's inevitable that we're going to move more towards the way that we now learn in our recreational lives, using resources and social networks. However, I think there are times, compliance being a good example, when we just want to know what we have to know and achieve what the organisation knows that we have to achieve. And that may be a case, if not for a course, for something pretty structured and clear in terms of its direction.
Okay. Rose, does the IOE have anything to say about this?
Well, I think there's a big difference between when you're seeking a formal qualification, when often the course is the way that traditionally it's happened.
Finance, for example.
Absolutely. I say that actually as a mother of a son who's training to be an accountant as well as somebody who teaches. So I think that's an issue. And, you know, we've struggled in higher education to move away from the lecture mode.
Yeah.
You know, it's so deeply entrenched. So I think it is really hard for people to move away. But there are enormous values for changing in certain circumstances for certain sorts of learning.
All right. Well, yeah, let's get a mic. So, come to the mic. Just one sec.
Sorry, I just disagree to some of the points because resources are available. Then within the organization, as you said, Kenny, that the motivation is that the time is not actually taken away from your actual work, and that adds extra a constraint on the employee that you have to do all this learning in your own time, which is not feasible. So there is no work-life demarcation set out. So courses in a way is to set that very clear boundaries that this is your time of learning and this is your time of work. And you do not get that with just online resources. Okay,
that's a very good point. When things go online, when you've got resources that aren't determined to be a course, then suddenly, well, you're supposed to be doing your learning in your own time, and perhaps if you're in the financial sector and you're under a lot of pressure, that can be particularly difficult because you're taking time away from your job to learn stuff. So let's come back to that in a second, because that's what I'd call a barrier. Let's first of all look at the benefits, but then we'll come back to the barriers in a second. It's voting time. Grab your handsets. And which of these do you think is the most significant benefit of moving from courses towards resources? Yeah? The benefit of moving from courses towards resources. Let's have a look at that, and then we'll get some feedback from the panel. Okay. Now, support at the point of need. Obviously, the point of need is when you get your just-in-time learning that enables you to do your job better. Do we agree? Let's get on to the barriers one, which I think is quite an interesting question. We had a very good barrier raised here. Look, the idea of moving towards an area where learning is self-service is great, but if I'm doing it on my own time, it's difficult because how do I balance up my time? Can we just have some thoughts about that one particular barrier, and then perhaps we can look at the voting. So anybody on the panel got any thoughts about how you balance your time when you're being asked to do your learning on your own time? Kenny?
I think it depends on the organisation. I think we're quite fortunate that we don't have that where we expect people to learn in their own time. They can if they wish. You know, they have access to learning management systems and stuff over the internet. But it's also about giving the learner the choice. You know, do they want to go on the one-day course? Is that the thing that's going to give them the most benefit? Or actually, can they watch a 5-minute video or download a PDF job aid that's going to help them achieve exactly the same things? So I guess it's about the individual and what works best for them.
Charles?
Yeah, clearly there are organisations who've got more of a culture of spoon-feeding their staff with information and knowledge than others. But even in those organisations, you tend to find people will work stuff out when they need to. If they've got a job to do and they need to quickly learn how to do it, they'll turn to whatever resources are available, and they'll turn to their community. It just so happens that the community is more than just the people standing around the water cooler. It's now social networks available online. That is the big difference, or one of the big differences.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to pick up on that question because I think it's really important, because it's the antithesis of empowering the learner. There's so much potential to empower the learner, but if the culture of the organisation in which the learner operates doesn't take on board that change, then you're right, there's also a danger. So it's that tension between empowerment and taking advantage of people, you know, and it does mean that there has to be a culture change within the organisation as well as the individual.
I think that cultural change issue is a key one that was in the back of my mind. Let me not, though, lead the audience. Let me ask you about the barriers that you think are out there in moving from courses which are structured and you have time to resources that you're expected to pull down and more or less drive your own learning. What's the biggest obstacle to the shift from courses to resources? Which of these 6 do you think it is? Grab your handsets like a cougar and push the button. I have to say that I think the cultural issue is the key one here. That people will always find a reason to do what they don't want to do. They'll always find an excuse. The key thing is to have an organisational culture, clearly like in Sky, where people are expected to learn on the job, and importantly, they're given time to do it. If you don't have that, you have what we had in 1999, which is organisations shutting down their classrooms, moving all the learning onto e-learning, and expecting people suddenly to learn everything in their own time at their desks. Guess what? It never happened. Let's see the results. Oh, right. Biggest barrier is lack of proof that knowledge has been acquired. That's a fascinating one. I'm not going to say anything. I said at the beginning, before I pressed the button, that organisations will always find a reason not to do it, not to change. That's a classic reason that will be given. And for me, the response to somebody who says this is, well, all right, tell me how you're sure in your current learning system that learning has taken place? There will almost certainly be no answer unless they're testing for knowledge immediately after each course and after 6 weeks and after 6 months. So for me it sounds like a classic, I'm going to find the reason to justify my core feeling about this.